Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome again to becomeatechpro.com. In today's session, we want to move into shell scripting. Okay? Shell scripting. So let's look at the two words, okay, that make up shell scripting. The first one is shell, and the other one is scripting. Okay? So when you say shell, what does it mean? Okay, so shell is an interface between the user and the operating system. Remember, we talked about operating system when we're introducing ourselves to Linux. We talked about different distributions of Linux, right? We've seen other operating systems like Windows and Mac OS, right? So when you say shell, okay, in Linux, it is the interface between the user and the operating system. Okay, so we can look at it as that program that takes the command from the user, right, and gives it to the operating system for execution, right? Because we've been running commands mkdir, touch, echo, all of those commands that we've been running is only possible because of the shell. Okay, so shell is the interface between the user and the operating system. Okay, so let's just okay, file. Okay, so shell scripting. Let's add a new file. Let's call this shell scripting. Okay, so shell scripting. Okay, so we've seen what a shell is, right? We've seen it as the interface that collects command from the user and gives it to the operating system for execution. So that is a shell. Okay. So now the scripting part, what is it about? Okay. If you've seen movies, right, you see several movies, and the actors and actresses in those movies, they are given scripts to work with, right? And if you look at the script, it follows a certain pattern, right? Like, oh, this actor says this and expresses this emotion, and the next actor or actress says that and expresses that emotion, right? It follows a particular order, right? For the film to be made, right? For the acting to be done, okay? So also with shell scripting, right? There is usually a certain order, right? So when you say shell scripting, okay, it is the collection of several commands, one or more commands actually, because it could just be a single command, right? But when you document command or commands in a written format such that you give it to the operating system for execution, you have shell scripting, okay? For example, we've been running commands, touch, right? You say touch a file, that's a file name, right? Right? You do this, you touch a file, right? Then you go ahead, you mkdir, right? Mkdir, maybe a directory, our directory, let's say that's directory name, right? So these are commands, right? But when you put those commands in a file, you see, this is my file, right? This is just a simple YAML file, right? When you start to put all this in a particular file, you have shell scripting, okay? So in this case, you want it to create this file, you want it to create this directory, right? After creating the file and directory, you say move the directory, right? Something like this, mv file name.txt. You want it moved into our directory. You see, there's an order, right? Create a file, create a directory. Now move the file into the directory. But if you decide to do this, cut this, and paste this under, do you think it makes sense? It doesn't, because you are moving a file into a directory that does not even exist. And you see, you are going to get an error at this point. Like the file name does not exist, the directory does not exist, right? But if you just do the simple thing and make it follow the certain order, right? Then you can talk about having a shell script, right? That is going to work because the order makes sense, okay? So now that is shell scripting for you. Shell scripting, right? We are looking at shell plus scripting, okay? So we've defined shell, okay? We've defined shell as the interface between the user and the operating system, right? That is a shell, okay? So it is that program that takes commands from the user and gives it to the operating system for execution. Okay, now that we know what a shell is, okay, so what are the types of shell? Okay, so to ensure that this is not so theoretical, okay, to ensure that this is not theoretical, let's try to open our Linux server and try to see all of this at work, okay? Let's open our Linux server and try to see all of this at work. So back to our Linux server. Let's log out of here. Okay. February 2023. Okay, so we'll continue to use the server we had all along since this is shell scripting. Okay, so instances. So you can just come here, instance state, and start the instance. Okay, so while this is opening, let's see what we can do. Okay, so but before then, we can quickly take a look at the different types of shell that are available. Okay, different types of shell that are available. Say bash. Okay. Okay. There's bash. Okay. This bash, okay, the full meaning is born again shell. Okay. So this is usually the default version that you find in newer versions of Linux. Okay. Born again shell. Okay. Whereas there's another one called SH. Okay. This one is the born shell. Okay. Born shell. So this is born shell. Okay. This version is usually the default shell that you find in older version. Okay. Born shell. Okay. This born is let me see, born. Let's take a look at some history around born. Born. Okay. Born. That's born again shell. Born shell. Let's look at some history around born. Okay. You can see born shell. Okay, is the command line interpreter. You see, let's take a look. I want to look at the full name of the person that introduced born. Okay, born. So the name is Born. Just trying to find the full name. Stephen Born. Okay, so Stephen Born used to work at Bell Labs. Okay, Stephen Born used to work at Bell Labs. Okay, and SH, right, was released in 1979 in the version 7 Unix release. Okay, you can see. So this is the name I was trying to get, Stephen Born. Okay, it was one that this Born shell was named after, right? You can see /bin/sh. Okay, so now the bash born again shell was an improvement over the sh. Okay, so apart from this, there are other types of shell. Okay, there are other types of shell. There's the C shell, CSH, which stands for C shell. There's the TC, TCSH, right, which stands for tiny shell, right? There's also the Z shell, okay? Z shell, ZSH, okay? Z shell, right? And there's also the KSH, right? KSH, KSH, right? Which is the default that you find in AIX, right? Which is IBM, right? So that's the default shell in AIX, okay? Default for AIX, okay? AIX. So this one is default for newer versions, and this is the default for older version. But our emphasis is going to be around bash and sh, okay? Bash and sh, that's born shell and born again shell, okay? So bash and sh will be where our attention will be. Okay, now if you remember, so far we've been working on this server, right? This server, let's refresh it. It should be up now. So far, we've been working on this server, right? So we can just go ahead, copy this, right? Can copy this and just come here. Let's use this today. I'll use a git bash. Let's clear. Okay. So using our git bash, we want to connect to the server. So just copy that, right? Remember in the last session, we analyzed this, so we understand how it works. But I can just, if I try running this right here, right, it won't work because this is not where my key is, right? See, it says no file or directory, right? So you see, it won't work because there's no file or directory there. So it's asking me for a password. So I want to kill the process, Control C. So the first thing I want to do is to go to downloads. That's where my file is. Okay, so you see ls.pem, ls wildcard, anything that ends in .pem, you see. I have two keys here, okay? So if I run the command again, you see, it will connect with, I'm in. So uname, you see, it will tell me it's Linux, right? You can see. So I can clear this now. And since I'm now in my Linux server, right? I'm now in my Linux server. I can try to see, okay? For you to know the types of shell you have, okay? There's a file in the /etc directory, okay? Called the shells file, okay? Remember, okay, I know where to go. I can just cut the file, okay? But I don't want us to load too much, have too much in our head. So there's a file in the configuration, in the directory containing configuration files, okay? There's a file in there called /shells, okay? So if we go to, if we say cat /etc shells, it will tell us the shells that we have. You can see, tells us the shells that we have. So all the shells that we have are listed here. You can see we have the born shell and we have the born again shell. Okay, there are other shells that we do not have right here, right? There are other shells that we do not have in here, okay? So, for example, if I decide to run a command, let's say I want to run a command wrongly. Let's say I want to say touch file, right? You see, file.txt. That command is wrong, right? So, you see, it says bash, touch command not found, right? Bash. So this tells us that what is running on this server, right? The default shell in this server is bash, right? The default shell in this server is bash, okay? So this is what it tells us, okay? But let's say we want to bring in other shells into this place. You can see, we can use the package manager, right? The package manager for this Red Hat server is yum, right? Remember, we've been using sudo yum install and sudo yum remove. So If for any reason we want to install any of the other shells that we've listed, right? We listed some shells here. Where are they? We listed some shells. Okay, we see we have just this and this. But if for some reason we want to install other shells, okay, we can go ahead and install them using the package manager, right? And the package manager for this is yum, okay? So if we want to install, let's say sudo yum install, right? So you can install multiple um, multiple applications or packages at the same time, right? All you need to do is to specify them. So let's see, we said there's C shell, right? So there's C shell, then there's Z shell, and there's K shell, that's corn shell, KORN, okay? So we say there's C shell, let's see what happens if you want to install, right? You can use sudo yum install. If you want it to question us on, if we don't want it to question us, we can just put -y. With this, we are trying to install just C shell, but it is also possible for us to install multiple applications simultaneously. TCSH, right? Or multiple packages at the same time. Let's see ZSH, right? And let's see KSH. Okay, so if we try to install all of this, you see, you can see it's installing. You see, KSH, TCSH, GSH, you can see installed, installed, installed. Okay, so if you remember, the other time we went to cat this file, right? Sudo cat /etc/shells. So it means in directory called /etc, there's a file called shells, okay? But let's say I do not remember, right? I do not remember the name, the location of that file, right? I can just go ahead and say sudo find within root a file named, you see, I always want to use this because you find it really handy in the course of this program, right? And even in the course of your work, called shells, right? I'm looking for a file called shells, okay? That's the file name, okay? So you see, it tells me that this file is in /etc/shells. So without having to remember the long parts, like the absolute part, right? Just remembering the name of the file and remembering this command, you can always get the location. So what I can do is to cut that file, right? Remember initially, we only saw bash and sh, right? Let's see what we have now. You can see we now have bash and sh, right? And what else has been added to the file? Z shell has been added, CSH has been added, TCSH has been added, right? You can see CSH and TCSH. If you see the installation process, right, you see, it shows us what was installed, right? Installing KSH, TCSH, and ZSH, right? So what I noticed is that once you install the TCSH, it also comes with, right? You can see it comes with the CSH. And when you install the KSH, it comes with the RKSH. You can see. So CSH on its own, right, got installed because this was installed. Despite the fact that we stated it, it means it comes as a package, right? So other than the KSH, there's also RKSH. You can see. Now, what it means is that we now have all these different shells in our Linux server, right? Whereas the default shell is the bash, right? And if you remember, we said the bash is the default shell in newer versions, right? The default shell in newer versions, right? So that's the bash. So if there's an older version, it's going to be sh, okay? So now that we've established this, we've seen how we can also install other shells, right? You can see, we've also seen how we can install the other shells, okay? So now, apart from the approach we used to see what shell, right, is running, you see, by running this command, for example, it tells us, oh, bash, this command not found, right? That's what we see, okay? But if we want to ascertain the shell in use, okay, the default shell that's in use, okay, we can run some couple of commands, okay, can run some commands. If you run echo, right, echo is to display, right? If you remember, echo is to display, right? Echo to display, and you say dollar shell, right? This dollar shell is an environmental variable, right? It's a system. We'll talk about user-defined variable and system variable, right? So this, any variable that you see that is in uppercase, that is stated in uppercase, is a system variable, right? Is a system variable. When you see a variable that is defined in uppercase, right? It is a system defined variable. But when you have it in lowercase, right, it is typically a user-defined variable, right? So we are getting ourselves introduced into variables, right? And once you understand variables, we'll see that shell scripting is going to be a piece of cake, okay? So now, look at this. Dollar, when you see dollar in front of a word or whatever, it means it is a variable, right? It is a variable that has been defined, but it's being called, okay? So it's defined and it's being called, okay? So echo dollar shell will tell us it tells us the default shell, you can see, which is bash, which we already found out by running a run command, remember? We ran a run command and we got this as bash, right? So you could also say echo $0. Okay, let's see. It says bash, echo $0, right? It says bash, right? So this is another way of ascertaining what it is. We'll get to see what $0 means as we proceed, okay? Also, there's a command you use for getting the process, right? Process, okay, tells us the process. You can see PS tells us the process that is running. You can see bash, right? Tells us the process. So that's one way, okay? Alternatively, you can say PS, right? Dash P flag, then $. Okay, we'll get to understand all of this. Then it brings the first line, right? But just running PS, right, tells us the process that is running, okay? But if you put dash P and you put this, it gives us the particular line, right? You see? So that is bash. You can see the different ways of ascertaining, okay? You can see this is one way, run a run command, and these are pretty straightforward way of explaining how to get it, right? So this is how we get our default shell that is running. Okay, now remember we talked about variables, right? We talked about the fact that there are user-defined variables and there are system-defined variables, okay? So when you have dollar, okay, in front of a word, or whatever it is, okay, it is a variable, right? But when you have the variable all in uppercase, okay, that is a system defined variable, okay? And when you have it in lowercase, it's typically a user defined variable. Okay, from what we've seen so far, we've seen that a shell script is a file, right? Remember, this file, we're typing all sorts of commands in this particular file at a point, right? So we referred to it as shell script. And we also saw that that command will be executed in the order it has been presented, right? It will be executed in the order it has been presented, right? So it makes sense for us to specify those things in a logical order. Otherwise, we won't get the result we want to get, okay? Now, the extension for shell script is .sh, okay? So if you are writing a shell script, okay, you need to save it with the .sh extension, You've been creating files, right? If you see our server here, let's see, ls, you can see we've created files, linux.txt, right? You see, Linux here is the file name, .txt here is the extension, right? So typically, a shell script should have a .sh extension. .sh, okay? Extension is used for shell scripts, okay? .sh. So usually for good practice, okay, a shell script, okay, let's just demonstrate that. Let's create a simple shell script, vi. Okay, remember our vi, we use this for, we use the vi as a text editor, right? Remember we said this is a file, okay? So we want to vi into a file. Let's call this file first.sh, right? First.sh, okay? So the first there is the file name. This is the first shell script we'll be working with, first.sh, okay? Or to make it simple for me, since I'll be doing this a lot, so let me just use number, right? First.sh, okay? So this is the first one. This is the first file that we are creating, okay? With vi, I want it to open a text editor, okay? And open it as this name. So instead of using touch, I'm using vi, okay? First, and the extension is .sh, okay? So I could do this, vi into this file, okay? So once I vi into this file has been created, okay? So to start, for good practice, to start a shell script, you should use shebang, okay? Shebang, which is hash, I to insert, okay? Hash, right? Shebang, right? Hash bang, right? But it's usually called shebang, okay? Shebang slash bin slash bash. If you remember, when we're checking echo shell, right? Or if you look at, how do I put it now? If you look at when we ran when we opened the shells file, right? The shells file, it listed the different, what's it called that we have, right? The different shells, okay? So because I'm running on bash, okay? I could use shebang, okay? This is spelled this way. Let me just type it. Remember, when you indicate this in front of anything, it indicates comment, right? So this, right, this hash band, right, hash exclamation indicates is pronounced okay, that looks correct, as shebang. Okay, this hash exclamation is pronounced as shebang. Okay, so when you see this, you say shebang slash bin slash bash. Okay, so instead of using shebang slash bin slash bash, okay, depending on the shell you want to work with, you can also specify shebang slash bin slash sh, right? Or shebang slash bin slash whatever shell you want to run, right? So this is just by the way, right? Shebang slash bin slash bash. Okay, it should always start all shell scripts. Although it is not mandatory, okay? It is not mandatory, okay? Whether you have it or not, it is not mandatory. But it's good practice to show that what you have is a shell script, is an indication that, oh, this is a shell script. Because sometimes you can create a file, right, and not put the .sh extension, right? Does that mean that the script will not run? You see? So shebang slash bin slash bash. So for best practice, it means you should always include this, but it is not compulsory. Okay? So what it only means is that if this is not specified, okay, the default the default shell will be utilized to run the script. Okay, so the default shell will be utilized to run the script. So now, why do we need to even learn shell scripting? So let's just save this. We've not done anything. We just put the first line, okay? So if you see now, okay, you have if you check here, you see that we have a file called, where is it? First.sh, you see? We have this file now that has been created, okay? So now, why do we need to learn shell scripting? Okay, there are several reasons why we need to learn shell scripting, and included in those reasons will be, you want to automate tasks that you would ordinarily run manually, right? Like create like setting up a what's it called, um, a script to create a file, to create a directory, and to move a file into a directory. Okay, that is a simple shell script, right? Instead of having to type mkdir, type all of those, okay, you can just automate the task, right, by using a shell script, by running a script for everything to get done. Okay, so you might have um, installations to do. Maybe you want to install a certain application, okay, a certain program, okay, on your server, right? Just as we've been using sudo yum install, sudo yum this, sudo yum that, okay? There are times you need to install a certain version or a specific version of a program, okay? So when you use sudo yum to install, what it's doing is that it's going to the yum repository and installing the most recent version that is in yum, right? Because yum is also being maintained, okay? There could be some newer versions because versions keep getting released every now and then, okay? Or there could be a situation where within your organization, okay, there's a newer version that is available, but they want a specific version, an older version, which is what is compatible with the application, okay? So you will need to install some scripts you need to install some programs, okay? And instead of installing these programs manually, you can just write a script so that you can run these scripts on several machines so that the same application of that specific version can be installed. You can see that is one of the reasons why you we learn shell scripting. Okay, we can also use shell scripts to take database backups. Okay, when I say database backups, right, there are databases which could be relational databases and there's non-relational databases. Okay, so relational databases are usually um, usually SQL based, okay, structured query language, SQL based, okay. So structured query language, which is a language used for writing to a relational database, okay. Relational databases, okay, and non-relational databases, okay. So usually for relational databases, how you recognize them is on the name, okay. The names give them out, the names give them away, okay. For example, you can say my SQL, which is a relational database, a structured database. It's usually in a table form, okay. It's usually in table form, right? That's relational database, okay, or structured database, okay. My SQL, PostgreSQL, okay. So these are some examples of relational databases, okay? There's also MS Server, Oracle, DB2, right? Okay. Other than this, there are also non-relational database, okay, which can also be referred to as NoSQL database, non-relational database. Okay. Examples of this will include MongoDB, Cassandra, and some other non-relational databases. Okay. So what are databases? Databases are used for storing, right? Storing databases, okay? For storing data, okay? So we can also use shell scripting for taking database backups, okay? Database backups. Okay, we can also use it for monitoring server resources, okay? If you remember, during our shell scripting session, we looked at some particular 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 commands, right? df, du, to see utilization of resources of the server, right? So you can also use shell scripting to write, to monitor server resources, okay? By putting together some of these commands, okay, in a script, you can monitor data, monitor server resources, okay? You can also use it for installing softwares on servers, okay? So let's see how that works, okay? So if, for example, let's see, we'll soon get to this point, okay? GitHub, package installation scripts. So there are some package installation scripts that I've written here. These are some of the topics we'll cover in the course of the program, okay? But to make it easy, right, I've set up some package installation scripts. You can see this shebang slash bin slash sh, right? So this is a script that has been set up, okay? So this script will install a Tomcat server, okay? This will install a Tomcat application into a server, okay? So you can see, don't be overwhelmed by all this you see, okay? Most of them is just for show, okay? Like this, put echo. It is advisable you do this, right? Remember how echo works, okay? To display, okay? I want something to display. That's why I have all of this. You can see that's why it's looking like this. You can see echo this, echo that, echo this. So these are a few commands that we just need to understand how it works, okay? But this echo, it really doesn't make any difference, right? You can see these are some installation scripts, right? So installation scripts is just a combination of commands, right? Right? Put together in a script. And these scripts can help us to install, when there's a script, I can just process the installation and everything gets done, right? Without my interaction. I can run a script and just walk away, right? By the time I'm back, everything is all done, okay? So you can use shell scripts, okay, for installing applications, right? Installing softwares on servers. You can also use them for deploying applications or cleaning up contents of a certain directory, right? You can run some commands, put them in a file, okay, and set them up to clean up a directory, right? Maybe like the temp directory, /tmp directory. Remember, we talked about the /tmp directory being the directory for storing temporary data, temporary files, right? That's the tmp directory. Okay, now that we've seen all of this, okay, so what do you think will be the requirements, right? Prerequisites for shell scripting, okay? Shell scripting, okay? So number one requirement is the knowledge of Linux servers, okay, which we are familiar with already. We've been able to set up Linux servers, right, using using the distribution of our choice and using the AWS instance, right? We've been able to set up Linux servers, okay? That is a prerequisite, okay? Another prerequisite is the knowledge of Linux commands, okay? For the past 3 weeks, we've been looking at Linux commands. We've seen a couple of them, okay? So, although that's not all, there are several other commands that we didn't look at, but we looked at some commonly used commands, okay? And those other commands that we do not know, right? As time goes on in the course of the program, we'll be running into commands, and as we are using them, I'll also be explaining the commands, okay? So that is that, right? So if you look at this now, if you look at this, we have created a file, right? A file, okay? We've created a file, okay? So now that's our understanding of the server. And the next understanding is going to be knowledge of Linux commands, okay? Knowledge of Linux commands. And lastly, some basic knowledge of programming, right? Which we are going to learn as part of this program. So, okay, what do we need to know to support our knowledge, right, of this, okay? We'll provide it. That's the whole essence of this program, okay? So once we have all of this, I believe we are good to go, okay? So now, what we need to look at is the steps for running shell scripts. Steps for running shell scripts. So we want to look at the steps for running shell scripts, okay? The first step is to create a file. You see, here we created a file and we called it first.sh, okay? So steps for running a shell script, okay? For first.sh, right? So let's see. Let's just take some notes here. Steps, okay, for running shell scripts. Shell scripts, right? Steps for running shell scripts. Create a file, okay, which we've done. Created a file, okay. The next step is to enter some commands, okay. Can enter some commands, right? Can enter some commands. commands, okay, and enter some commands, right? Then after entering the commands, we can now run the scripts, okay? Can now run the scripts, okay? We can now run the scripts. So these are the steps for running a shell script, okay? So now there are different ways we can run a shell script, okay? There are different ways you can run a shell script, okay? So to run a shell script, you can either say, let's say, you can put dots. You know what? Let's go ahead and create something, okay? Let's create a script, first.sh, okay? Where's my git bash, okay? So let's go back to that file, vi into first.sh, okay? So let's come down here, okay? Just want to run a simple shell script. I to insert, okay? Just want to run a simple shell script, okay? So we can say echo, right? Hello, everyone. Welcome to become a tech pro.com. Okay, so this is just a simple shell script. Okay, I can say date, right? Remember, this date is a command, right? Can remember, I want to, let me before this, I want to put who am I. The who am I is also a command. Who am I, right? Remember, who am I? Okay, is also a command. Okay, who am I? Specify date. Okay, so this is a simple shell script. Okay, because remember when we're looking at echo, I said we can decide to state echo without this. Okay, you can decide to state echo without this, or you can decide to put it in quotation, right? You can decide to put it in quotation. But without the quotation, okay, this is, okay, causing some issues. The sign that we have there, okay, is causing some issues, okay? So if I put it in quotation, right, you can see, and that's the good thing about shell scripting, you get to know when you are getting it right and when you are getting it wrong, okay? So hello, everyone. Welcome to becomeatechpro.com, right? Who am I? This will return the name of the person that is communicating this and put in a date, right? Put in a date, okay? So now, when you look at this, okay, if I run this is just there, okay? And this is not going to apply, okay? Because this is a comment, right? In shell scripting, when you have this, it indicates comments, right? This is a single line comment, okay? This is a single line comment. So if you look at this, for example, right? This is a script. We can save this script now. Escape, column, press escape, column, escape, column, WQ, okay? So I'm saving the file. So this file has now been saved, okay? We've created the file, okay? Let's look at the steps. We've created the file, enter some commands in the file, right? And we've gone ahead. We now want to go ahead and run the script, okay? So now, if you look at this, okay, there are different ways we can run a script, okay? So If, for example, you can decide to say dot slash, right, and specify the file name. File name dot txt. You can do this dot sh, I mean, because this is a script, okay? File name dot sh, okay? Another way of running it is to say, oh, I want to use sh to run it, okay? File name dot sh, right? Or I can say bash file name dot sh, right? Okay, so these are different ways I can run the scripts. However, to be able to run the script using the one at the top here, okay, which even looks not so clear, okay, to be able to run the script using this approach, like dot slash, right, then specify the file name, an executable permission needs to be added to the file, okay? So the file needs to be an executable file, okay? So if you remember, going back to our git bash, okay? If you remember, if you run ls-ltr, for example, you see, this file has a 644 permission. For this to be executable, we need to make it a file with the xxx permission, okay? We need to be able to add the xxs permission, right? You need to be able to add the xxx permission, okay? So without the xxx permission, we'll not be able to use this first approach of saying dot c slash, what's the file name? First dot sh, right? This is the name of the file. You see, if I try to run it now, you can see it says permission denied, okay? So it means I need to run it with the executable permission, okay? So what even happens if I decide to add sudo? Okay, if I decide to add sudo, you see, it says command not found. But permission denied, you know, when you see permission denied, what comes to your mind is, oh, let's use sudo, right? But this time around, it's saying command not found. The reason why this permission is denied is because in the first place, this file is not an executable file. It doesn't have executable permission, okay? So if we want executable permission, we can show mode, right? What's the file name? You can say Ugo plus X, right? X is executable permission, okay? Or we can just go ahead and say, want to give it 777 permission, okay? So Ugo plus X, show mode, Ugo plus X, what's the file name? First dot sh, right? You can see, if you go ahead and do your ls-ltr again, okay, you see that this file has now changed color. It's no longer looking like a regular file, okay? It is now an executable file, okay? So if I go ahead and run this command again, okay, this command dot slash first dot sh, you see, it says, it returns something. Hello, everyone. Welcome to become a techpro.com. User EC2, you see, dash user signed on this date, you can see, and this time, you can see 1:54 p.m. Okay, no, 5:01 p.m. Okay, sorry. So that is this, you see, this is one way of running a shell script, okay? But you won't always want to go and be changing permission to a file, right? Which doesn't make sense, right? Like changing a file to executable just because you want to run it like this. When there are simpler ways of running a script, right? So you can just specify sh, right, before this, and you run your scripts. Or you specify bash, because we have bash as well, and you run your script. Okay, so let's see something. Let's see something. Okay, so if we decide to go ahead, let's see. Let's remove that executable permission. Okay, to remove it, you can just say ugo minus x. Okay, to take out the executable permission, right? Okay, so now we've changed mode. If we do our ls-ltr now, you can see it is now back to what it was, right? It's no longer the executable file that is showing green again, right? You can see it is now a regular file. So instead of using this approach, okay, we can decide to just say sh space first dot sh, right? So if you run this sh first dot sh, right? What it will do is that it's going to run the script using the specified shell, right? You see, sh. Okay, we want it to run it using sh. Okay, so let's run. You can see, did it run it? Hello, everyone. Welcome to becomeatechpro.com. We can also go ahead and use bash, right? Instead of sh, right? We can go ahead and use bash, right? Use bash, you see, it runs it. Let's see, what else do we have? We have C shell, see, it runs it. We have T shell, right? You can see, it ran it, okay? What else we have? We have Z shell, right? We have Z shell, it ran it, right? We have what else? Con shell, K shell, it ran it. We also have RK shell, you can see, RK shell, it ran it. So let's see what happens. If we decide to remove some of those shells, if we decide to remove some of those shells, let's say we are taking out, let's take out TCH, okay? There's sudo, remember, yum remove, okay? You can use this remove to uninstall. Sudo yum remove, okay? TCSH, okay? Dash Y. You see? I've removed it. I removed T shell, you can see. So if we go back to that our file, right? That our file, our shells file, okay? And I'll say cat, let's cat that file. We know it's in /etc, and the file name is shells, okay? So if you look at this, what has happened? All we took out was T shell, right? But TCS, we took out CCSH, right? We also noticed that C shell is gone, right? C shell is gone because they are together, right? They are together, always together, right? So we can see we uninstalled the TCSH and C shell is also gone. So if we go ahead and uninstall maybe K shell, you also see that our K shell will be gone because they are together, right? Let's say we take out K shell, okay? You can see, you take that out, if you run your cat it shell, you see what happened? K shell is gone, RK shell is also gone, okay? So we are now left with bash, sh, and zsh, okay? So if for some reason we try to use K shell, you see, we don't have K shell again to run, you can see, what does it say? It says there's no such file or directory, right? Because we've uninstalled that shell, okay? you can see we have different shells and we've seen different ways of running the shells, okay? So now that we can also run our scripts in debug mode, okay? We can also run our scripts in debug mode, okay? So when you run your script in debug mode, what it does is that it will run the specific lines, right? And it will show the content of the script returning those commands, okay? So for example, let's say we want to use bash. Let's clear this first. Clear, okay? Let's say we want to use bash, right? Bash first.sh, we know this, right? We know how to run script this way, okay? First.sh, we are trying to run this, okay? So to run this in debug mode, all we need to do is to introduce a -x flag, okay? -x flag, okay? We introduce the -x flag. Ordinarily, this alone, we run our scripts, okay? But if we decide to run it this way, you see, we are running it in debug mode. Debug, D-E-B-U-G, debug mode, okay? So that way, it's showing us what is the command that is giving what. This command, this is what it's doing. This who am I, this is what it's doing. This is what it's doing. So running in debug mode will also help us to understand